Welcome to the Story Partners Podcast. I'm Annie Manus, and we're so glad you found us.
The people who introduced it already had it chopped up in a line, and then you just roll up a dollar bill and snort it and have this euphoric feeling of energy. I started using that as regularly as I could from the summer of my 8th grade year.
In our last episode, we heard from Eddie Smith, and this week we're going to hear from his wife, Emma Smith. She has an incredible story too. By 8th grade, she was hooked on meth, and she was a functional addict until she wasn't. Her drug addiction caused her life to spiral out of control. Through a series of supernatural encounters, God drew her back to her childhood faith. This is Season 2, Episode 3, Addicted to Meth in Middle School.
I have brothers that are 17 and 19 years older than me. I was kind of a accident, a surprise for sure. And they weren't expecting to have kids. They were living like they weren't having kids. I don't know if their marriage would have survived necessarily had I not come along. I think I saved my mom's life in a way that gave her the will to continue, and my dad direction to maybe make some changes that would slowly over the years be better for his family. My mom was older. She was 37 when she was pregnant with me, and she was a smoker, and doctors said, this baby is going to be handicapped. It's probably going to be mentally disabled. We recommend that you go ahead and abort her. That was especially hard for her because she had a daughter between my oldest brother and my youngest brother that didn't survive and had been born with handicaps. So to hear those things from a doctor about me, it was very, very scary. And so they were making these recommendations to her, and she said it pretty heavily. And she said, no, this is my baby. I'm going to keep her. Whatever God gives me is what I'm supposed to have. So the Lord was working through my life even before I was born. Faith was definitely an element for my mother in our house. But I don't remember much spiritual growth. I don't remember much spiritual conversations. I don't remember Bible reading. None of those things were really present. My dad said he was a believer, but it was hard to see the fruit in his life. It was more of a do as I say, not as I do. My mom, she would take me to church on Sunday mornings whenever we lived in College Station, Texas. The pastor, during an altar call, said, if you feel like you want to accept Jesus into your heart, just come up here and let's pray. And that's the way that I understood it at 6, probably. And I told my mom later, I said, man, I really wanted to go, but I was nervous to go to the front of the church. She said, well, next time you feel that way, just grab my hand and we'll go. And I said, okay. So I don't know how long it was later, how many Sundays it was later. I felt the call again, and I grabbed a hold of a hand, and I went to the front of the church and met the pastor there. And my mom will tell you, I was holding on to a hand. No one was attached to it. It was not hers. So for me, that memory is just I knew there was a presence that was going with me. I can't today say whether that was Jesus or an angel, but he walked me down the aisle to the pastor to say the prayer and to commit my life to him. I think the Lord gave me that beautiful moment because he knew that I would need it. I was born in College Station, Texas, and lived there till I was about 7. And then we traveled every couple of years from the time I was 7 till the time I was probably 8th grade. So my dad was an engineer for road construction, and that took us from Texas to Norman, Oklahoma, to Stillwater, Oklahoma, to Wichita, Kansas, and a bunch of tiny little towns all over Oklahoma and Kansas. It was really challenging, and it was really quite lonely. My dad, I think he had taken a new job actually, but moved us from Texas to Oklahoma. And my mom wasn't working at the time. So he would go away, and he would generally, for a large portion of my life, he would work away from home during the week and come home on weekends. My mom would get this anxiety on Friday nights before my dad would come home for the weekend, and she would just change into this entirely different person than she had been all week. And then he would get home and they would fight, and I would remove myself from the situation. So if that meant go to my room or go outside or whatever, and I'm super young, I just know that this is the rhythm, and I need to flee quickly. But I started developing this fear of him because of the way that she began acting on Friday nights. So my perspective became of my dad what hers was, because I knew the argument was coming. During the summer times, he wanted to take me traveling with him during the week because he wanted to spend more time with me, but didn't want to spend more time with my mom. I would say, no, I don't want to go. Don't let him take me. And I developed this just horrible fear that he was going to take me away and leave me somewhere, and I would never see my mom again. It was my 5th grade year that they decided to sell the house that we lived in, and we would go travel as a family in a travel trailer. So we lived in a 32-foot Jayco travel trailer, the three of us, my 5th and 6th grade and 7th grade year. I homeschooled 5th and 6th grade, and then 7th grade I went to school in a tiny little town in Tyrone, Oklahoma. It was like you wouldn't even know you drove through it. Once we were traveling as a family, it was a daily situation where they weren't used to being together daily again. And so it was, when he would come home from work, it was kind of a nightly situation where, okay, they're arguing. Now we're in a small space. I've got to go. So I would take my dog and we would roam the trailer park. I spent a lot of time alone with my dog. My dog was my best friend. It was really lonely, and we did that for 3 years. My mom's mother had Alzheimer's, and so they made the decision about my 8th grade year that it was time to come back here so that my mom could take care of her parents. And so that meant some stability for me as well. So I went to school for the first time ever 3 years in Mounds, Oklahoma, a tiny little town. There was a lot of growth during 8th grade. New school, new church, faith is beginning to bloom. We began going to an old country church that had connections to my family members who've been around in the community for a long time. And so that's where we plugged in. I had tons of questions at that time because I was beginning to get plugged in with youth group and hearing all these things. And I started at that point to kind of read the Bible for myself. As I would go through, I would be like, well, why would God allow this to happen? Why would God allow that to happen? I had a whole notebook, and I'm sure I still have it somewhere, of questions that I had as I read. So I was telling my mom, look, I have all these questions. And my mom couldn't answer them because she grew up in the faith community of, you just have faith, you just believe, you don't really ask questions aren't okay. And she still to this day can't answer like anything. She just, I love Jesus, and that's where she's at, and that's fantastic for her. But I had all these questions that were unanswered, and I really got hung up on, why would God ask Abraham to sacrifice Isaac? And this was just, did not compute with me. And she said, I don't know either. Let's go talk to the pastor. You can ask all these questions to the pastor. Whether from my perspective, he did not answer them effectively or my understanding was not the same, I walked away from that meeting very discouraged and resolved to kind of walk away from faith, because if my questions can't be answered, if like the leader of this faith, the leader of our church can't answer these questions for me, then I'm just blindly believing what? Like, I don't understand. So I walked away from church. I think that it definitely would have helped me go a different direction, to have a consistent mentor in my life, for sure. Going from a kid that was lonely, being put in a school where I'm the new kid in 8th grade, and middle school is like world changing, and I'm making friends, and what kind of friends am I making? Like, and then I become, attention seeking as well. So I didn't do a good job of making friends. And then at the end of my 8th grade year, hanging out with new friends that I smoked weed for the first time and didn't feel bad about it. We had an off-campus lunch where I went to school, so we would all go take smoke breaks and smoke a joint on the way to the convenience store several blocks away, and then I would come back and have to sit through Algebra 1. I got caught, and my mom it's one of those visual moments that you just never forget because it's so she was yelling at me from the front door. She was just livid. And then my dad sits down beside me and he says, "Hey, you can't do that right now, but maybe someday when you're older, I'll sit down and smoke a joint with you." So for me in 8th grade, I'm like, okay, that's my permission to do it, but not to get caught. Mom is working, but she shifted from days to overnights, and so she's not really present in what's going on. So I'm still alone. It's easy to hide. I had always been low of energy. Looking back now, it was from some traumatic things that had happened when I was a kid, and the loneliness and shutting down every time my parents. So I struggled with energy levels, and went to doctors for a lot of years to figure that out. It was mostly emotional and not physical. I was introduced to phentermine, which is a weight loss drug, and loved it. The phentermine gave me energy and fulfilled something in me that I was looking for. So I continued to try to get it, and they said, "Hey, we don't have this anymore," from this person that I was hanging out with, but here's what I do have. And so I was introduced to meth for the first time. The people who introduced it already had it chopped up in a line, and then you just roll up a dollar bill and snort it and have this euphoric feeling of energy. I started using that as regularly as I could from the summer of my 8th grade year. It was pretty easy to buy meth once I actually knew people who had it. And nobody ever wants to get high alone. So if somebody else has it, they're gonna be like, "Hey, you wanna come get high with me?" And then, so you have it free. You just know that next time you get something, you've got to reciprocate because you wanted somebody to get high with you too. I think the lies that it created was the biggest conflict, not the actual physically doing the drug itself. It was the lies that I had to tell and the lies that I lived. That was the internal conflict. Lying to my mom about where I was, I would, of course, lie about where I'm spending my money, lie about where my money's coming from, because at some point, whenever you become well connected, you also might, I might have bought a larger quantity and then sold it so that I had enough to continue using, or my own high was free. I would lie about, okay, I'm going to work tonight, but that's not actually where I would go, and there's no accountability, so no one's checking up on me. I would lie about who I was with. Friends that I was with, boys that I dated, one in particular, they didn't really like him, but they never really told me no either. So, but I would just lie. I lived a lie. I was a functioning addict through high school. I did meth all through high school. And when I say functioning, it means I'm still getting good grades. I'm still held down a job whenever I was 16. I still did all the right things. I graduated National Honor Society. I excelled in like everything that I did. But looking back at pictures, I was like, oh, I mean, you can tell that there was some sort of like death to me even going through all of it. But I thought I was functioning. I was using alcohol. I was smoking weed. I was doing all the, kind of what I thought was minor drugs while I was in high school. I have a history of endometriosis, and so wasn't diagnosed with that till I was about 18, and by that time had a lot of scar tissue and just a lot of issues, and so doctors said I would never have kids. We were driving somewhere, most likely to the casino, and the Lord gave me this vision of a girl, like I had a daughter. And I'm like, that's really weird. It was just for a moment. It came from nowhere. I wasn't thinking about it. Like, okay, what was that? I had a relationship with a boy that was very dangerous. So we both liked the drug. We both liked, alcohol. Our relationship was super volatile, and so he was violent to the point where like he would break things on my car. I'd be so angry he would reach up and break my rearview mirror. He would be so mad he would take his hands and smash like my quarter panel on the back part of my car that I had at the time. And then it started becoming physical. We decided we were going to be adults at 18 and try to clean ourselves up a little bit. We both got decent jobs. We just couldn't hold it together. Like we could only pretend for so long. We split up a little bit after that. And that's when I just began to spiral down again. I also disconnected myself from my family because I was so deep into this drug lifestyle that I couldn't maintain a lie and be in relationship with them. So I chose the other lifestyle. I was working for a bank, but my performance just kept getting worse and worse until one day my manager called me in. She's like, Emma, it looks like you're just rolling out of bed every morning. Like, what's happening? I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not sleeping and trying to make up all these excuses. But she ended up letting me go. I had purchased a tiny little house in a community that I didn't know at the time was pretty well known for meth. And so when I lost my job there, I became close friends with a drug dealer that lived right behind my house and a weed dealer that lived like half a block away. And so began selling. And then as I was selling, meth and whatever came with it, because it could be morphine pills, it could be whatever people wanted to get their hands on, I was beginning to get access to until I began to meet the people who were actually making the meth. And then, of course, whenever you're an addict and you kind of can get to that next high level, you're like, I was like, okay, well, I need to know this person. So I started making meth with people. And I was homeless, sold my house to the drug dealer's sister because I couldn't make payments on it anymore. So they got it for super cheap. And then I was floating. I was able to keep my car because it was paid off. So I would live in my car sometimes. I would live with different drug dealers. I would come back every once in a while and stay with a drug dealer that lived in my neighborhood. I was just all over the place. I was robbed at gunpoint a couple of times, and I was in so many situations that I could have been physically hurt or killed and wasn't. The high was no longer feeling good because it became such an intense lifestyle that it was painful. It was painful to use. It was painful to be without. Like, it took more drug for me to be alert and to have those good feelings. It took more variety of drugs for me to achieve like that high that I was looking for. I was introduced to two meth dealers that actually they were making it. They were manufacturing it. And I was with the person that was introducing me to them. And as he said, hey, this is so-and-so and so-and-so, like I look at their faces and they have no face. Like their face was just jumbled and smeared looking. Like I know that it was like a spiritual presence within them that was negative and was scary. I think that whenever you open up a realm so deep like that, it maybe allows you some insight into a spiritual realm that gets really dark. And I began having several of those encounters. We were in one house and we were preparing to make a batch of meth, and I looked down the hallway and someone had walked through the door, but something came out of them or from them and like zoomed down the hallway at me, and I just jumped back like as quickly as I could, and it just like terrified me. So I began having like these spiritual encounters. I was at the drug dealer's house that lived near the house that I had sold his sister, and I was playing video games actually, and he came and sat down on the couch beside me, and he put his chin on my shoulder, and I can't remember what he said at the moment, but he said something and it came out in an old lady's voice. It was not his voice, it was an old lady's voice. And so I moved away from him to the left, and like whatever was coming from him came out of him and went through the door that was like across and in front of us, and the door slammed. I mean, he's still sitting on the couch beside me, and so these things are happening, and I'm hearing things, and I'm like, this is creepy, this is scary. That particular night, I actually, in the midst of my addiction, took a stick and walked around the outside of this house and drug it in the ground, and I was just praying for the Lord's protection around this house because this is where I was staying. And I hadn't been praying. Like sometimes you'll have God conversations and those drug conversations when you're up all night and talking about who is God, what is all these things, but I wasn't really having a relationship with him at the time. But at that point I was like, okay, I need protection. I know that I'm getting into something that is bigger than I am. And so that's just when I began to start praying. For about 3 years, I lived in the fully immersed in the buy, sell, use, drug lifestyle. There was nothing that really called me out of the desire to want to do drugs or to live this lifestyle that I had developed. My mom praying for me for all of those years that she knew something was wrong, and Jesus, he was responding to her prayers for me. It was a Memorial weekend 18 years ago. After 3 days of not having any product, I said, okay, I'm just done. I was sick and tired of being lonely, of not feeling good, of not feeling like I was who I was designed to be. And all of a sudden, like it just lifted from me. So I called my mom and I said, look, this is what I've been doing. This is where I'm at. I'll have all my stuff ready. Come get me. I'm ready for a change. So I packed my cat, I packed my bags. My mom picked me up. We drove to 3 different hospitals looking for an inpatient program that would help me detox and help us handle me, whom neither one of us knew what to do with. And none of them had a program. None of them sent us anywhere that was good. They said, no, we can't take her. We don't do that here. So I went back to my parents' house and just began to detox. I still had a lot of pills, so I would take Flexerils to put myself to sleep, and different muscle relaxer and different sleeping pills. And so slept pretty good for like 2 weeks, and then kind of started coming out of that daze of sleep and coming back into reality. So I just began to repair that family relationship as I was getting clean and sober, and actually just began to read the Bible again on my own, without prompting. And the Lord gave me a dream. I was standing at the front of my parents' house, and an angel came to me and said, "The Spirit of God is in you." And for me, that was him saying, "I forgive you." I was asking for repentance. I said I repented at this point. He was claiming me. It was like a fresh start. It was him being there with me all along. And it was he was saying all of those things, and just the Spirit of God is in you. Like, I'm his. I never went to jail. I still have all my teeth, which is huge for a meth addict. Like, many of them don't. Many of them don't even get out of the lifestyle. They die or go to jail, and I've got friends that have done both. But the Lord got me out of that. Once I left the drug lifestyle, I no longer experienced the evil spiritual things that were going on. But I still have the ability to sense those things in situations and in people that maybe others can't. So it's still a gift that the Lord has allowed me to have. I'm pretty intuitive in some of those situations, but I also have not allowed myself to go into many of those dark places like I was. They're still there. It's still happening. Paul says our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and the evil spirits. And I've seen it, so I know it's true. And there's a lot of people today that don't believe that those things are real. We're so distracted with the world. And then there's some Christians who don't believe that some spiritual gifts still exist, which is just really hard to understand. I'm at my parents' house reading the Bible on my own, I think beginning to journal again. I'm working now, so I very quickly was working, and I was also praying for my husband, praying for this, whomever the Lord is going to bring me, praying for him to be, to love the Lord like I love the Lord, to be able to help me stay on track, to be refocused, and to be a healthier relationship. So I'm praying for all of these things. I'm not going to church. I'm working and going home and reading the Bible, some to the best of my ability. And then I meet Eddie almost a year later, and we began talking through MySpace, that shows how old we are. So we're talking through MySpace, and then we began texting over the phone. And his heart just wins me over, and we're having a long distance relationship. He's in Fort Smith, Arkansas. I'm here in Tulsa. We began traveling back and forth to see each other. So, again, within 2 weeks of us dating, we absolutely just knew. And I was hesitant to say I love you, and he said it, and I cried, and I said I love you too, and we just knew. So we began officially dating in May. I moved to Fort Smith in September, and we got married in October. That was 17 years ago this October. Eddie's like, there's a church I've really been trying to go to. I'd really like to be consistent. I've been invited by some friends. Let's go. Journey Church, where we met Rob and Anna. And Rob was just phenomenal. And I could see how Rob was just taking Eddie under his wing. And we began to do discipleship programs at Journey. And this is where I really began to have my spiritual growth. And then we were having Bible studies at our house, and we're both like freshly new Christians on fire. And Rob's like, he's got a hold of this. So he's like, we're going to keep this up. And so we were serving, and I began volunteering in the community. So we would walk the streets and do invites. But it was through that discipleship time at Journey Church that we really got the sense of who God was, what church was supposed to be like for real, and not by the poor examples that we had had in our life. Reading the Bible together and for ourselves, the Bible study that we were holding with all kinds of different levels and ages of Christians in our home just began to get deep. And that was better than any high that you could have gotten from any drug. It was a better like happiness, better fulfillment. Like it was full. And you just can't recreate that with anything else. So that's when we really started to grow spiritually. We began living missionally, I believe, when we were in Fort Smith with Journey Church, knowing that we had a call on our lives early on in our marriage. We knew that we were called to serve God. We knew that our stories and our experiences were going to help other people be called out of the darkness that they're in. So we began serving there at Journey. I was working with kids and youth, and Eddie was working with men. We were at Journey for about 3 years before we moved back to Tulsa. But we continued seeking and knowing that our spiritual life was the priority in our lives. We connected with Life Church in Tulsa, and then finally to the church that we're attending now, which is a teaching church that we really like, getting questions answered that I feel like should have been answered many years ago. We lead middle school youth. We've been leading that for 4 years now. It being part of my story as a teenager to not have my questions answered, I'm like, please, I know you have questions. What are they? Let's talk about it. You think your questions are too big? We'll find answers. So we've been really, really passionate about that. I think that many adults are so fearful of the questions that's going to be asked of them, and that they're not going to have the answers, that they remove themselves from those situations. They remove themselves from being the mentor for that person. But I also understand, as a young person, they have to be answered in a way that a young person can understand them. Because if you're speaking spiritual maturity at a high level and that person doesn't have that spiritual maturity, you're not watering down the gospel, but you need to be able to communicate it in a way that someone understands it. It's like cross-cultural ministry, even from an adult to a youth. So understanding where they're coming from and where their brain is at. But we can't be afraid to engage. We can't be afraid to engage people, whether it's younger people or our peers. We packed up, moved to Tulsa, stayed living in my parents' house for a short while. The month that we moved here, I got pregnant. After doctors had told me I'm never gonna have kids, I've got too many issues, I'm riding a motorcycle, I'm like, what? I'm pregnant, okay. So the moment that I found out I was pregnant, I knew it was a girl. Names have meaning, and so we wanted something that really told her story. And Eliava in Hebrew means the Lord is willing, and it starts with an E. And so we have Eddie and Emma and Olivia, so it's Ellivea. In Hebrew, it's spelled a little differently, and we're not Jewish, so we kind of need to change it into our own, but keeping the root Olivia. So her name means the Lord is willing. It was a great pregnancy and healthy, and she's my little miracle baby. We are the church. The church isn't a building. We're to go into the world and make disciples of all nations. And Jesus gave us that commission. And that, I think, is just the greatest desire of our hearts. The first time that we went to Costa Rica, we were invited to stay as missionaries by the missionary that we were serving. He's like, I think you guys are supposed to be here. And we're like, oh, yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for the invitation. We love it, but it's not the time in our life for us to do that, to make that move. And then I went to Nicaragua without him, and a missionary there kind of prophesied over me that basically this is what I was supposed to be doing. I'm like, okay. Now the missionary from Nicaragua is in Costa Rica, and he was here earlier this year, and he came and stayed with our family, and he said, yeah, I'm inviting you guys to come to Costa Rica and be under our umbrella. Like, I think this is what you're supposed to do. So now we have two very clear invitations to be in Costa Rica. This is the first time in my life that I've had home. Like, I have, a house that we put on a wish list. We said, Lord, we want these things. And I said, oh gosh, Eddie, he is never going, like, this does not exist. And then the Lord simply gave us this house with every single thing that we wanted. We have a church community. We have friends that are family. Like, a large portion of me is like, I don't want to give all that up. Like, being a lonesome kid and not having stability and not having security and not having community, right? Like, I have those things now. Do you really want me to give them up? I'm absolutely willing. Like, it's not about Costa Rica. It's wherever the Lord calls. Side note, but it's not Africa. But seriously though, if wherever he's calling, we've been delayed or disobedient enough times to know that he begins weaning us off of those things, and it's very uncomfortable. And so I don't really want to go through that discomfort of being kicked out of, or being weaned and trimmed off of life as I know it. I'd rather be obedient because I love him and I want to, and it's easier to go out of that heart motivation. But as great as Costa Rica sounds, home is just as beautiful. We're leading a mission trip to Costa Rica next month, including our daughter, where she'll participate as like an adult of the group and not just as a kid that's coming. And so we really want to see how the Lord's calling her life to this mission field too, because we feel like if he's calling us internationally now, he's calling us as a family, and we need her to experience and feel that call as well. So it could be within a couple of years. If at the latest, it'll be when she graduates high school. I've been clean for 18 years, this month actually. God absolutely satisfies. He is the lover of my soul. All of the emotions that I have and all of the things that I've always needed, he's satisfied those and more, because he holds my purpose. He holds my future. He holds my past. He loves me no matter what. All those things just make me whole in him. Look at what the Lord has been willing to bring us through and give us and continue to do in our lives. It's just it's beautiful.
We often hear that Jesus satisfies, but many of us find it hard to believe that because we've never really had a personal encounter with the Lord where Jesus ministers to that specific personal pain that we have. We come up with our own ways of masking pain and coping, often adopting bad habits and behaviors in the process. We might realize the destructive behavior and kick it, only to replace it with something else. What we need the most is for healing in the deepest wounded places of our hearts, and that is exactly what Jesus offers. A personal encounter with Him is the thing that will bring the healing to our hearts that we are longing for. This is where we truly experience satisfaction. In our next episode,
I was an author, consultant, CEO. I put a lot of energy into that image. That meant I had the best clothes, I had the best cars, I lived in the best places, so everything was for external appearances. There was a deep, deep sense of I'm an imposter. I definitely felt like a fraud.
money, power, women, success. Daniel Mueller had it all. He was on top of the world until one day it all came crashing down. Join us for our next episode called Nothing to Prove.
Hello, my name is Spring Nunnally, and I'm from Hernando, Mississippi. I love Story Partners because they share the gospel in a unique way that relates to all audiences, and it gives a tool for the Lord to use in people's lives. Story Partners is a nonprofit ministry that tells stories that point to Jesus. We tell these stories through short documentary films as well as this podcast. We're a crowd-funded ministry funded by monthly giving from people like you. To learn more or join our crowdfunding community, visit us at storypartners.org.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Story Partners podcast. This story was recorded and edited by Walt and Annie Manus. If you were encouraged by it, we hope you'll share it with a friend. We'll see you next time.